Even though I tried to get details from the Vietnamese man, he didn't understand my Japanese because he was anxious. When he finally started speaking, I couldn't understand him. Time passed frustratingly, and Sarah sighed. This is problematic. We need to get the details quickly before his memory fades. But getting an interpreter now will take time. Is there no other way? Sarah sighed again and glanced at me. Seeing her pleading eyes, I made up my mind. My name is Michael. I'm 30 years old. Currently, I work as a paralegal, assisting attorneys at a law firm. I've been through a lot to get here. I've also given up on some dreams. However, I think I'm living the most peaceful life now. The documents you requested are ready. When I handed the documents to the male attorney, John, he glanced at them and said, "Thanks. I'll look at them later," and turned back to his computer. But, hey! You borrowed my paralegal, and that's all you have to say? Take a proper look at his work, said Sarah, showing her strong-willed attitude. Sarah is the attorney I work for. Although I primarily work for Sarah, I occasionally help other attorneys like this. John quickly flipped through my documents and praised them for being well done. Of course. Michael is amazing. Sarah complimented me as usual. Since obtaining her lawyer qualification at 24, Sarah has made remarkable achievements and now handles requests from various places as a highly skilled attorney. Despite being such an impressive person, she somehow appreciates me. When I first came to this office for an interview, it was the same. As soon as she saw me, Sarah greeted me with a big smile and conducted the interview with the principal and me. They were looking for a new paralegal because Sarah's former paralegal had passed the bar exam and left. They asked about my background and gave me a brief legal test. It was a very simple test. I was hired on the spot. Honestly, I was confused if I was the right fit, but Sarah smiled and said, "Looking forward to working with you." I can't thank Sarah enough. Since then, Sarah has praised me even for small things, saying, "Well done," or "Amazing." To be honest, I'm currently lacking confidence, so I can't fully accept her compliments. Every time I'm praised, I let out an awkward laugh. At first, it felt like having a very kind older sister, but after working here for 3 months and spending time with Sarah, I've fallen for her. When she smiles at me, my heart races. However, a highly skilled attorney and a mere assistant paralegal. It's like comparing apples and oranges. My feelings for her are my motivation to live, but I try my best to keep them hidden. One day, Sarah was assigned as a public defender. The client was a foreigner with Vietnamese nationality, who as a technical intern, could speak some Japanese. In that case, there's no problem. Let's go. Sarah quickly prepared and left the office briskly. I hurriedly followed her. While moving, we checked the details of the case. Oh, this is... I was speechless. We need to push for a reduced sentence somehow. Sarah frowned as well. The Vietnamese client had been involved in a type of fraud. He had withdrawn cash using someone else's card as a so-called runner. In recent years, special fraud cases have been increasing, often leading to harsher sentences for fraud and theft. Depending on the scale, even first-time offenders often face jail time, making this a challenging case. The Vietnamese man we met was named Nguyen. As soon as he met Sarah, he kept repeating, "I didn't know it was a crime." Even though we tried to get details from him, he couldn't understand our Japanese due to his anxiety. When he finally understood and spoke, we couldn't understand him. Time passed frustratingly, and Sarah sighed. This is problematic. We need to get the details quickly before his memory fades. But getting an interpreter now will take time. Is there no other way? Sarah sighed again and glanced at me. Seeing her pleading eyes, I made up my mind. I spoke to Nguyen in Vietnamese. Nguyen looked surprised for a moment, but then his eyes lit up and he started speaking rapidly. I had to ask him to slow down as I couldn't understand him when he spoke too fast. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. I didn't want anyone to hear my broken Vietnamese, but this wasn't the time to be picky. I continued to converse with Nguyen in Vietnamese. Nguyen's story was pitiful. Life in his home country was tough, so he learned Japanese and came to Japan as a technical intern. However, his internship site wasn't doing well, and he had almost no money left after living expenses and sending money home. At that time, someone told him about an easy part-time job. He was just supposed to withdraw cash using a card handed to him by that person. When he asked why, he was told it was to help an elderly person who had difficulty moving. He believed the story. He even thought he was helping someone. He withdrew the cash and handed it over, feeling proud. He was a bit disappointed when he was told, if a foreigner hands over the money, the elderly might get startled. So I'll do it later, as he wanted to see the elderly person's happy face. But he was pleased, thinking he had helped someone. However, the few $100s he received as payment was from the cash he had just withdrawn. Although he found it strange, he was so excited about getting money so easily that he ignored the doubt. As a result, he was identified by the ATM's security camera and arrested by the police. Ugwin kept repeating, "I didn't know anything." He probably was telling the truth. I clenched my fists. I was trembling with anger. Ugwin was a victim too. However, even if he didn't know, it was still theft. There's no such thing as an easy job where you get hundreds of dollars just for withdrawing money. When I explained this, he slumped down. Then, worried about the elderly person, he tearfully apologized. He had withdrawn $10,000. After that, he lost contact with the Japanese person who had hired him. Although we finally got the details and understood the situation, it didn't change the fact that it was a difficult case. After the meeting, we returned to the office. On the way, Sarah looked at me intently. "I didn't know you could speak Vietnamese. I thought you only spoke English." Hearing this, I furrowed my brow. "Ha? I never said I could speak English. I didn't even tell Ryan." When I stammered, Sarah sighed. Never mind then." Her confusing words made me furrow my brow even more. "Actually, your grandmother asked me to." "What?" I widened my eyes in surprise. "Indeed, I am currently living with my grandmother." "What did she ask? From where?" As I was bewildered, Sarah smiled. "To explain that, you'll need to tell me about your past, Michael, who graduated from Stanford University and holds a California bar license." I widened my eyes even more. How much did she know about me? I felt a bit scared, but Sarah kept smiling. Encouraged by her compassionate gaze, I began to speak hesitantly. "Due to my parents' work, I've been living abroad since the 3rd grade. I spent 3 years in Vietnam, and then, after my parents were promoted, we moved to the US. While living in the US, I developed a dream. I wanted to become a lawyer and help those in weaker positions. In a country with many immigrants like the US, there are numerous issues of all sizes. I wanted to help the people of Japan where I was born, and the people of Vietnam where I spent 3 years. With that dream, I studied diligently every day. To stand by the weak, I had to be strong. After entering Stanford University, I went on to Stanford Law School and obtained a California bar license. However, the big hurdle was the quotas. Initially, I couldn't get my own cases and had to rely on senior lawyers to meet my quotas. While there were many cases due to the litigious nature of the US, I couldn't afford to take my time with each one. I began to prioritize efficiency to meet the quotas, becoming increasingly focused on it. Then, a turning point came. I thought it was a winnable case. However, the opposing side's research surpassed mine. They exploited weaknesses I hadn't noticed, and we lost the case. The client was furious and fired me as their lawyer. I was furious with myself as well. If I had approached the case more carefully, I would have noticed and addressed the weak points. In my quest for efficiency and my overconfidence in winning, I had forgotten the most important thing. Realizing this, I judged that I was not suited to be a lawyer. Rather than helping the weak, I had neglected them. This was not the job I had dreamed of. In my exhaustion, I received a letter. It was from my grandmother. Hearing about my situation from my parents, she sent me a letter from Japan. "Come back anytime." Seeing those words made my heart tremble. The neat, careful handwriting made me naturally shed tears. "And then? I want to go back to Japan," I murmured. My memories of Japan were up to 3rd grade and the annual visits. While my maternal grandparents had already passed away, my paternal grandmother always welcomed us with a smile. She was always warm and welcoming. I wanted to go back to that place. So, I returned to Japan alone and started living with my grandmother. For the first few months after returning, I spent my time in a daze. I spent my days eating the delicious meals my grandmother prepared, sitting on the porch reading books while looking at the flowers in the garden. And sometimes helping her with gardening. Every flower my grandmother grew was vibrant and blooming beautifully, filled with love and care. She often called this my recharging period, and surrounded by flowers, I truly felt warmth, peace, and a sense of fulfillment growing inside me. As my health gradually improved, I considered starting a part-time job and began reading a local job listing magazine when my grandmother handed me her mobile phone. Despite being 80 years old, my grandmother loves new gadgets and skillfully used her mobile phone. She showed me a job listing for a law firm. Grandma. I mean, right now. I'm not really up for anything related to law. As I hesitated and tried to decline, my grandmother smiled and pointed to the word paralegal on the screen. Of course, I knew what it meant. During my time as a lawyer in the US, I had been helped by paralegals many times. I think you're suited for something related to law, Michael. Hearing that, I reluctantly took the phone from her and looked at the job listing. A paralegal, assisting lawyers. I had often delegated preliminary investigations to paralegals for the sake of efficiency. If their investigation was insufficient, even a winnable case could be lost. I knew better than anyone the importance of this job. If I focused on conducting thorough investigations as a paralegal, would my past mistakes eventually be forgiven? As I pondered this hopeful thought while looking at the job listings, my grandmother peeked over my shoulder and tapped on a specific law firm ad, saying, "This one looks good, doesn't it?" "Nothing ventured, nothing gained," she said as she pressed the apply button. "Wait, what? Hang on." As I panicked, my grandmother smiled and said, "It's fine. Look here, it says they welcome people who do thorough investigations. It's perfect for you, Michael." I stared at the screen. Indeed, it matched my motto. My grandmother smiled contentedly. "Why don't you at least try the interview? It might open up a new path for you," she said casually. In the end, I searched for the law firm on my phone and applied myself. I thought my grandmother had randomly picked one of the many law firms. It was the firm where I currently work. Wait, was I set up? After finishing my story, I looked at Sarah, who was smiling broadly. "Maybe so," she said, clearly amused. "Actually, my parents' house is 2 doors down from your grandmother's. I live alone now, though." Her words took me by complete surprise. "What?" Sarah seemed pleased by my astonished reaction and laughed softly. "My parents were busy, and from around upper elementary school, they decided I could manage on my own, so I often ate dinner alone." Sarah's expression turned slightly sad. She mentioned that in lower elementary, her parents would come home earlier, but during long breaks like summer vacation, she would have packed lunches prepared and spend the days alone. Although she had some friends' moms checking on her occasionally, she couldn't impose on them too often. As she got used to being alone, she spent her time watching TV and studying. During that time, she got to know my grandmother. "Your grandmother said she was lonely because her son's family had moved overseas and she couldn't see them often. So, I started having meals at her place sometimes and we became close." I had never heard this story. "That's why I know a lot about you, Michael. Like how you wet the bed again when you suddenly moved to a new environment." She brought up my most embarrassing past, and I panicked. "Wait. Grandma, why did she tell you that?" Seeing me shout in embarrassment, Sarah laughed joyfully. "Whenever I visit my parents, I always drop by your grandmother's house. She would happily talk about how you went to Stanford University, went to law school, and became a lawyer. She said it's great because I became a lawyer in Japan, too." However, it seems that as time went on, my grandmother began to express more concerns about me. It was around the time I started struggling between my ideals and reality. And finally, I returned to Japan. "I told your grandmother to let me know if there was anything I could do. She asked me to help you once you started to recover a bit." So, I waited for that moment. As I began to regain some stability, Sarah got Ryan to post a job listing for me. Actually, my paralegal quit a while ago, and Ryan kept asking if I needed to hire someone. But I delayed it a bit. She had thought of me, who returned to Japan in despair. She told my grandmother about the perfectly timed job listing, and my grandmother casually suggested the position to me, saying, "How about this one?" and tapping the apply button. I had been perfectly guided into applying to the law firm where Sarah worked. Wow! I was played like a fiddle. This is embarrassing. I covered my face with my hands, feeling ashamed. But Sarah let out a soft laugh. "Your grandmother thought about how to handle it for a long time. She worried that if she said she knew someone there, you might get suspicious or even cancel the application." I recalled my interactions with my grandmother. Grandma, she acted so well. Oh, but I was drawn in by the welcome those who conduct thorough investigations line. As I started to say, Sarah chuckled. "That's amazing. Your grandmother suggested writing that line, thinking it might attract you." I looked up at the sky in defeat. I was completely outmatched by my grandmother. Despite having spent so little time together, my grandmother saw through everything. "Oh, so that's why you praised me for every little thing." It was to build my confidence. When I said that, Sarah blushed slightly. "I said I'd handle it, but I didn't really know what to do. I just wanted you to regain your confidence since you seem to have lost it." Like a kind older sister, she praised me no matter what I did. It all made sense now. Feeling resolved, I said, "All right. Let's do our best for Nguyen." As I said this, feeling refreshed, Sarah's expression clouded. "What should we do?" "Of course, we'll aim for leniency, but what he did was wrong." Seeing Sarah struggle, I turned to her. "How about a plea bargain?" Sarah's face lit up for a moment. Although it's not yet common in Japan, it was often used in the US. "If we can get information about the fraud ring from Nguyen and capture them." Sarah's expression slowly brightened. "Yes, plea bargains are still rare in Japan, but if we can use his information to capture the fraud ring, it could lead to a reduced sentence as part of a cooperation agreement." Sarah's face shone with determination. "I can't forgive those who deceived Nguyen either. It would be great if they were caught and Nguyen's sentence was reduced." We had our strategy. A few days later, Nguyen was successfully acquitted. Sarah's skills were impressive, and I played my part well too. We divided our tasks. First, Sarah approached Nguyen about compensating the victims. To Nguyen, $10,000 was a significant amount. However, showing sincerity could lead to a settlement and a lighter sentence. Sarah encouraged Nguyen to contact his family in Vietnam. Initially hesitant, Nguyen was persuaded by Sarah's heartfelt words. "How would your family feel if they found out later that you were imprisoned in Japan? And what if they learned they could have prevented it by helping out?" "I would be devastated." Moved by Sarah's words, Nguyen tearfully contacted his family. His family scrambled to gather money. Although they couldn't collect the full amount, their sincerity reached the victims, leading to a settlement with the condition of paying the remaining amount and even obtaining a petition for a reduced sentence. As for me, I ran around based on the information Nguyen provided. Despite Nguyen's phone being cancelled, I traced his footsteps and found small clues. Based on Nguyen's testimony, the police created a sketch and tracked down the man who had given Nguyen instructions. I visited Nguyen's training site to see if anyone else had received similar proposals. Thanks to these pieces of information, the police successfully busted the fraud ring. Cheers! On the night we secured the dismissal of charges. Sarah and I celebrated at an izakaya. We were both excited and the drinks flowed freely. After a while, Sarah leaned her elbows on the table, her cheeks flushed, and stared at me. Being stared at for a while made me nervous. "What is it? Is there something on my face?" Sarah shook her head seriously. "You should get your lawyer qualification in Japan." The sudden suggestion sobered me up. "Why?" I managed to ask. Sarah's expression remained unchanged. "From this case, I realized you're truly someone who stands by your clients." Her serious gaze made me look away. "It's too late for that. Besides, as your paralegal, I can support the clients well enough." Sarah lightly tapped the table. "What a waste." Her words struck deep. If you stay as my paralegal, we'll only be able to help one person. But if you become a lawyer, we can help two people together. I looked down. But I don't think I'm cut out to be a lawyer. Hearing this, Sarah furrowed her brow. The main reason I left my career in the US was my shame in not being able to properly support my clients. However, there was another reason. I was exhausted by the intense courtroom battles. Especially in the US, where harsh language was often used, and as someone not naturally inclined towards conflict, I had tried to put on a brave face for my clients. But once I left and returned to Japan, I realized that world wasn't for me. Hearing my reasons, Sarah puffed out her cheeks. Coward. With one word, she struck a nerve. If you're like this, you'll never get to date me. Her sudden bombshell made me panic. What? Why? Sarah, still pouting and blushing slightly, replied. I know you like me, don't you? I turned red and stammered. No. It's just. You're drunk, right? That's it. You're drunk, Sarah. At my suggestion, Sarah slowly shook her head. Did you forget who my source is? I pictured my grandmother's smiling face in my mind. I buried my head in my hands. She's told me everything about you, you know? How you're kind, amazing, wonderful, and all that. Living alone with my grandmother could get a bit lonely. Trying to dispel the loneliness, I often talked a lot. But the only topic I really had was Sarah, so I ended up talking about her. As I buried my head in my hands, Sarah continued talking to herself. Beautiful, cute, and I love her. Hey! I didn't say that much to my grandmother. When I protested, Sarah smirked. So you didn't tell your grandmother. But what about in your heart? Her teasing expression was a knockout for me. I do think that. As I admitted honestly, Sarah suddenly blushed bright red. She had been provoking me, but now she was the one who was embarrassed. I didn't think you'd admit it so easily. Sarah covered her cheeks with both hands. So, since you said that much, will you go out with me? When I asked, sounding a bit sulky, Sarah puffed out her chest. If you pass the Japanese bar exam and become a lawyer. Here we go again with that, I thought, but then Sarah gently touched my hand. Because, it would be such a waste. You have a better ability to empathize with people than I do, and you're smarter than me, right? I squeezed Sarah's hand tightly. What? Sarah looked a little flustered, and I leaned in closer. I promise. I'll pass it as soon as possible. And when that time comes, it will be too late to regret it. Then, I brought Sarah's hand closer to me. Can I do something? I think this will give me all the motivation I need. With that, I kissed Sarah's hand. Sarah's ears turned bright red. That expression was incredibly endearing. A few years later, our wedding reception was coming to an end. After reading our letters to our parents, we called my grandmother to the spotlight. My grandmother, not knowing what was happening, was led by the staff to stand before us. I took the microphone. Grandma, thank you for always worrying about me. Hearing this, my grandmother's eyes welled up a bit. And thank you for being like a speaker, relaying everything I told you to Sarah. The whole room erupted in laughter at my words. Grandma looked away and whistled innocently. She's such a playful grandma. But thanks to that, I am now married to Sarah. I also managed to pass the bar exam in Japan. Thank you for making me midnight snacks and supporting me during my studies. Then, Sarah handed over a small package. It was a preserved flower made from the flowers my grandmother grew in her garden, so they wouldn't wilt. It was encased in glass and could be enjoyed for years. Just like the flowers in the garden, please stay healthy and keep watching over us. As I said this, my grandmother nodded with a smile. Sarah and I smiled at each other. I am who I am today thanks to my parents' care, my grandmother's love, and Sarah's encouragement. Now it's my turn to give back. I want to live my life supporting these wonderful people and the clients who come to rely on me.